How does China look at the Prime Minister's visit this week? This is the first time we are told that the Chinese president is traveling out of Beijing to his native province to welcome a world leader. How much significance is there in that symbolic gesture? And what does China expect the Prime Minister to deliver on?
I think that the forthcoming visit by the Prime Minister of India, Mr. Modi, would be a very, very important. Hopefully, it will be a historical one. Just this gentleman, that my friend from ISS, just mentioned a very important three visits. One is a visit by Rajiv Gandhi in 1988, and one is by Vajpayee in 2003. And I think the third one is this one, the most important China visit by India prime ministers. Why I think that Rajiv Gandhi's visit in 1988 was the most important one? Because in that visit, that was the first such a high-level visit after 1962. And during that visit, there was a tremendous important consensus reached between two sides. That was, we can discuss the border question, but at the same time, we can develop our relations, overall relations at the same time. So some people say that this is the India-China model. Put in another way, not let the border issue to get in the way for overall development of our relations. And I think this consensus is very, very important historically. Now that 20 plus years have passed, we see that now what we achieved in China and India. Personally, I was a so-called visiting scholar studied at JNU, Jawaharlal Nehru University, between 1993 and 1995. At that time, there was no single direct flight between our two countries. When I went to India, I had to take a flight run by Ethiopian Airlines. Actually, that airlines was between Tokyo and the capital city of that African country. Beijing and New Delhi were only 2 points of stopover. No other choice. But now everybody knows that so many flights between our two countries, maybe that 100 flights 1 week. And last year, around 700,000 Indian people visited China. And I know that there is a bigger community in Shanghai. They are very happy. They are preparing a bigger rally to receive your prime minister in Shanghai. According to that newspaper report, there are around 45,000 Indian people staying, working, and studying in China on a long-term basis. So that we could not imagine this kind of things when Rajiv Gandhi was in China 20 or 30 years ago. So there's a great change. And people say that this is the first stage of China-India model. I agree with that. We can call it China-India model 1.0. The focus was, the great achievement during that time was in the trade area. China have become that the leading partner, the largest trading partner of India, and the India position in China foreign trade is also improved in a bigger way. Now that your new Prime Minister, Mr. Modi, will come to China, I sincerely hope that his visit will usher in a new area. May I call it that the India-China model 2.0. The focus will be Chinese investment and make in India. That's my expectation.
So last time when President Xi came to Gujarat and then to Delhi, there was a lot of optimism around his visit, and our Prime Minister, we know, is very fond of China. But the headlines were dominated by a border incursion by the PLA, just at the same time at which your president came to India. And the big question amongst the Indian people was, it's all well to talk about trade and growing our bilateral relationship, but why does China keep poking India in the eye, also at a time as sensitive as this, when your president is in our country, and choose that opportunity for the Chinese army to come across and pitch tents and create a skirmish, which really takes away from a lot of the goodwill that both the heads of state would like to build around this relationship?
Now that I'm very glad that you raised a very important question about the borders with me. I know that the Indian media like to talk this. Also, I like to talk it also. Yeah, you see, first, I totally agree with the statement saying that to keep peace and the tranquility of the border area is the fundamental basis of the development of China-India relations. I totally agree with that, number one. Number two, I sincerely hope that the border issue can be solved as early as possible. It is in the interests, fundamental interests of China and India, number two. Number three, that the dispute area is too large. Honestly, no side can make a substantive compromise on this border issue. Number four, okay, I will just follow that what you were talking about, that the Prime Minister Modi that just opened a account in Weibo. This is a Chinese. Just in a few days, he got around 46,000 followers. And I like to see that the direct communication between your Prime Minister and his followers in China. But you did not mention one very important fact. I read this communication carefully. Most of the words wrote by the Chinese followers about something about the border question. They raised the issue of Arunachal Pradesh. They're saying something that please return back the South Tibet to China, something like that. You see, this is a great pressure Chinese government is facing. So it's really difficult to solve the border issue. Honestly, it's a difficult question. So in my mind, that the best way to deal with this question is not the discussion like this. Let the diplomats to discuss the border question quietly, carefully. At the same time, let us to talk economic development, make in India, loudly, actively. My personal advice is don't make China-India border a big story in both the media in China and India. And also, since that this gentleman is a party man, may I make a suggestion that I know that the political system in China and India are quite different. You quite often have such political rallies for election in states and general elections. So every 3 months or every 6 months, you will have a big election rallies. My sincere hope that don't let the border issue between China and India to become a talking point for this election rally. Put it in another way, don't make the border issue between China and India politicized this problem.
So there are two interesting things that you say, and I want Mr. Ram Madhav to respond to those. First, on Weibo, on the Prime Minister's account, a lot of the posts that have come in, and I've been reading about this myself, have been about South Tibet or Arunachal Pradesh. and they're saying, why don't you return this to us? The other thing that the Chinese diplomat said is that the border issue is very difficult to resolve. There is a sense in India that as part of its strategic imperative, China wants to allow the border dispute to fester in a bid to strategically contain India. Do you share that assessment, Mr. Ram Madhav? Because you've been told by the Chinese diplomat, don't use the border as an election stunt. Don't just say things which are more rhetoric than reality. How do you respond to what we've heard from the Chinese diplomat?
There are two things, Rahul. Firstly, I don't have the luxury of an ex-diplomat to make any harsh statement here, because I am a leader of the ruling party and my Prime Minister is visiting this country. So I would refrain myself from responding to certain comments made. Number two, Weibo is not Twitter. How much freedom one enjoys, I don't know. Having said it, I will come to the issue of border. Our ambassador has made it amply clear that maintaining peace and tranquility on the border is a commitment we both have entered into 20 years ago, in 1993. We have to maintain that peace and tranquility. Now, Arunachal Pradesh was not South Tibet before 1979. Post 1979, Arunachal Pradesh became South Tibet. There are many such issues that I totally agree with a friend scholar that we need to discuss on much serious forums, not definitely in the media, nor in the Weibo, nor in the public rallies, I agree. Having said it, our Prime Minister, in his statement at the time of the visit of President Xi Jinping, mentioned this point that maintaining peace and tranquility is important, because without that, you cannot have that political trust. And I am happy that, contrary to what our scholar is expressing, the Premier of China, Li Keqiang, was categorical in his interview to Your India Today, saying that yes, building political trust is one of the priorities between our two countries. This one has to appreciate that we have to build political trust. It is possible only when we maintain that peace and tranquility on the border. As far as the question of trade relations is concerned, I must tell you, this theory that we should freeze contentious issues and work on the issues on which our mutual interests depend is a 20-year-old theory propounded by Deng Xiaoping. Please read history. We have followed it for 20 years. That is the reason why today we have $70 billion bilateral trade. You can't tell us afresh that you should first ignore those things and build on the economic relations. We have been doing it for 20 years. But I am saying 20 years down the line, today we have two strong leaders in both the countries. Let us look for gradual progress on contentious issues also. That should be the approach. I think that both our leaders are committed to that. And I think under the leadership of President Xi Jinping and Prime Minister Modi, we will definitely register progress on contentious issues, including the border.
In 1988 was the most important one, because in that visit, that was the first such a high-level visit after 1962. And during that visit, there was a tremendous important consensus reached between two sides. That was, we can discuss the border question, but at the same time, we can develop our relations, overall relations at the same time. So some people say that it will be a historical one. Just this gentleman, that my friend from ISS, just mentioned a very important 3 visits. One is a visit by Rajiv Gandhi in 1988, and one is by Vajpayee in 2003. And I think the third one is this one, the most important China visit by India prime ministers. Why I think that Rajiv Gandhi is visiting India-China model. Put in another way, not let the border issue to get in the way for overall development of our relations. And I think this consensus is very, very important historically. Now that 20 plus years have passed, we see that now what we achieved in China and India. Personally, I was a so-called visiting scholar study at.
How does China look at the Prime Minister's visit this week? This is the first time we are told that the Chinese president is traveling out of Beijing to his native province to welcome a world leader. How much significance is there in that symbolic gesture? And what does China expect the Prime Minister to deliver on?
I think that the forthcoming visit by the Prime Minister of India, Mr. Modi, would be a very, very important, hopefully genuine, Jawaharlal Nehru University between 1993 and 1995. At that time, there was no single direct flight between our two countries. When I went to India, I had to take a flight run by Ethiopian Airlines. Actually, that airlines was between Tokyo and the capital city of that African country. Beijing and New Delhi were only 2 points of stopover.